Welcome to Lesson 9, where we're continuing Chapter 1 of FIA FA1 with a focus on the crucial topic of data protection. We're here to support you every step of the way as we dive into the principles and responsibilities involved in safeguarding information. To help this community grow, please consider liking, sharing the video, and subscribing to the channel. Your support makes a big difference and helps us continue bringing you quality lessons. Let's get started with today's lesson, and thank you for being here. Data protection refers to the set of laws, policies, and practices designed to protect individuals' personal information from misuse, ensuring their privacy rights are respected. At its core, data protection controls how organizations collect, store, process, and share data about individuals. This approach became crucial with the increasing amount of personal data generated and exchanged in the digital era, and it addresses issues like data security, lawful processing, and individual rights over personal information. In the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is the cornerstone of data protection law, providing individuals with rights such as access to their data, rectification, and the right to be forgotten. GDPR also sets stringent obligations on organizations to uphold privacy and security standards. Additionally, countries worldwide have introduced their own data protection laws, often influenced by GDPR, to address similar concerns and establish safeguards. For example, GDPR applies not only within the EU, but also to entities outside the EU if they offer goods or services to or monitor EU residents, making it one of the most far-reaching privacy regulations globally. Data protection is closely linked to the concept of privacy, which is recognized as a fundamental right in many countries and under international human rights treaties. Privacy ensures individuals' autonomy over their personal information, whereas data protection provides the mechanisms to enforce this right. Countries establish independent regulatory bodies, known as data protection authorities, DPAs, to enforce compliance with these laws, investigate complaints, and raise public awareness about data privacy rights. For instance, the European Data Protection Supervisor oversees such matters within EU institutions. For more information, sources like the European Data Protection Supervisor, EDPS, and the UK Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, offer detailed insights into the principles and requirements under data protection frameworks like GDPR and comparable global laws. These regulatory bodies provide comprehensive resources on rights, compliance, and best practices for organizations and individuals alike. Data protection is essential because it safeguards personal information, which is critical for individuals' privacy and security, and ensures that organizations maintain trust and compliance with legal standards. This protection is increasingly important with the rise of data breaches and cyber threats. Here are some key reasons why data protection is crucial, along with real-world examples. 1. Preventing identity theft and financial loss. Data breaches can lead to identity theft, fraud, and financial loss for individuals. For instance, in the 2017 Equifax breach, the personal data of 147 million people, including social security numbers, birth dates, and addresses, was exposed. This breach highlighted the risks when sensitive data isn't adequately protected, leading to significant financial and reputational damage for Equifax and making individuals vulnerable to identity theft. Number 2, protecting privacy rights and freedoms. Data protection laws like the EU's GDPR protect individuals' rights to privacy. For example, GDPR's right to be forgotten allows individuals to request the deletion of their personal data if it's no longer necessary for the purpose it was collected. This right empowers individuals to control their digital footprint. For instance, if a person decides to remove old job listings from search engines, GDPR enables them to do so, enhancing privacy. 3. Maintaining trust in businesses and services. Data protection practices help organizations build trust with customers. For example, Apple emphasizes privacy and data protection by encrypting data and limiting data sharing with third parties, a practice that has reinforced user trust. Organizations that prioritize data protection are more likely to retain loyal customers and attract new ones who value their privacy and security. 4. Complying with legal standards and avoiding fines. Non-compliance with data protection laws can result in hefty fines. In 2019, British Airways was fined £20 million for failing to protect the personal and financial information of over 400,000 customers. This case demonstrated the legal and financial consequences of neglecting data protection measures, underscoring the importance for organizations to adhere to data protection regulations such as GDPR. 5. Protecting national security and critical infrastructure. In sectors like healthcare, energy, and finance, data protection is critical for protecting national infrastructure. For instance, healthcare organizations handle sensitive patient information, which, if exposed, could lead to serious harm for individuals. In 2017, the NHS in the UK was hit by the WannaCry ransomware attack, affecting thousands of computers and jeopardizing patient care. This attack emphasized the importance of robust data protection measures for public safety and national security. Data protection is thus vital for individual privacy, business integrity, legal compliance, and national security. With increasing digital data creation, secure data handling practices are essential for organizations to protect both their stakeholders and their reputation. The failure to protect data can have severe and far-reaching consequences for individuals, businesses, and even governments. Below are some major consequences of inadequate data protection, illustrated with real examples from the UK. 1. Financial penalties and legal costs. Organizations that fail to protect data often face significant financial penalties. Under the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, companies can be fined up to 4% of their annual global turnover for serious breaches. For example, British Airways was fined £20 million in 2020 after a cyber attack compromised the personal and financial information of over 400,000 customers. This fine, though reduced from an initial £183 million, underscored the high costs associated with data breaches, not only due to penalties, but also because of compensation claims and legal expenses. Reputational damage. Data breaches can severely harm an organization's reputation, impacting customer trust and brand loyalty. In the case of TalkTalk, a major telecommunications company in the UK, a cyber attack in 2015 exposed the personal data of approximately 157,000 customers. The incident led to significant reputational damage, with thousands of customers canceling their contracts due to privacy concerns. Following the breach, TalkTalk suffered financial losses, including an initial £400,000 fine from the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, along with long-term reputational harm and lost revenue from customer departures. 3. Operational disruptions and recovery costs. Data breaches can also disrupt operations, as organizations often need to halt activities to assess and fix vulnerabilities. In 2017, the National Health Service, NHS, was hit by the WannaCry ransomware attack, which led to widespread disruptions across healthcare services. Many appointments and procedures were canceled, and IT systems across hospitals and clinics were down for days, impacting critical patient care. The NHS faced recovery costs estimated at £92 million, highlighting how a lack of adequate data protection measures can lead to costly operational disruptions. 4. Loss of sensitive personal and financial data. The exposure of sensitive personal or financial information puts individuals at risk of identity theft, fraud, and financial loss. When UK retailer Dixons Carphone suffered a breach in 2018, data for 10 million customers, including personal details, was compromised. Many of those affected had to monitor their accounts and report potential identity theft, underscoring the risk to individual security when companies fail to protect data adequately. Number 5. Increased regulatory scrutiny and oversight. Repeated or high-profile breaches can lead to increased scrutiny and regulatory oversight. Organizations may be required to implement stricter data protection measures, participate in audits, and improve internal compliance practices. For example, following the data breaches involving British Airways and Marriott International, the ICO and other regulatory bodies called for enhanced cybersecurity practices across industries to prevent similar incidents, impacting business practices and budgets across sectors. These cases from the UK illustrate that failure to protect data can have far-reaching consequences, impacting everything from financial stability to customer trust and operational integrity. Ensuring robust data protection practices is not only a regulatory requirement, but also a critical factor in maintaining business resilience and public trust in an increasingly data-driven world. Data protection legislation, like the Data Protection Act, DPA in the UK, establishes clear regulations regarding how organizations store and manage personal information about individuals, ensuring that their privacy and rights are safeguarded. Here's a more detailed breakdown of what this means and why it's important, particularly for businesses. 1. Purpose of data protection laws. Data protection laws, including the UK's Data Protection Act and the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, aim to ensure that personal data, such as names, addresses, health information, financial records, and other sensitive details, are kept private and secure. These laws outline strict guidelines on how data should be collected, stored, processed, and shared. 2. Impact on business departments. Within a business, the departments most affected by these laws are usually personnel or human resources, HR. HR departments manage sensitive information about employees, including personal identification data, medical records, performance reviews, payroll information, and more. Protecting this data is critical because it directly impacts individuals' privacy, security, and rights within the organization. Inadequate handling of this information could lead to breaches that compromise individuals' private information. 3. Risks from lack of data protection. Without robust data protection policies, organizations are exposed to various risks. Unauthorized access to personal information. If data is not adequately secured, there's a risk that unauthorized parties, like hackers or even internal employees, could access confidential information. For example, if an employee's health records were accessed without permission, this could breach their privacy and potentially lead to discrimination or harm. Inaccurate or misleading data. Data protection regulations require that information stored about individuals is accurate and updated. If incorrect data, like an error in a credit score or a criminal record, is stored, it could lead to serious consequences, such as affecting a person's ability to obtain a job or a loan. Incorrect or outdated information that spreads rapidly and cheaply in digital form amplifies the potential harm. Misuse of data for unintended purposes. Data protection laws also regulate that personal data should only be used for the purposes it was initially collected for. For instance, if an employee's data was collected to process their payroll, but was later shared with a marketing department to analyze consumer trends without the employee's consent, this would be a breach of data protection law. Such misuse could damage trust between employees and the organization and even lead to financial penalties. 4. Example of data protection in action. An example is when a company like a hospital collects sensitive patient information, such as medical histories, for treatment purposes. Data protection laws ensure that this data is only accessed by authorized medical staff and not shared outside the organization or used for marketing without explicit consent. If a hospital employee mistakenly shares patient information with an insurance company, this could be considered a breach, potentially resulting in a fine and a loss of trust in the hospital. In essence, data protection legislation is crucial to maintain the privacy and integrity of personal information, safeguard individuals from harm due to data misuse, and protect organizations from reputational and financial damage. Data protection legislation, such as the UK's Data Protection Act, DPA, and the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is aimed at protecting individuals' personal information and privacy in a digital world. This legislation sets boundaries on how organizations collect, store, and process personal data about individuals, not about corporate entities. Here's a breakdown to make it more understandable with real-world examples from the UK. 1. Scope of data protection. The legislation focuses on protecting data about identifiable individuals, specifically personal data. This includes any information about a person that allows them to be directly or indirectly identified, such as names, addresses, health records, and employment details. For example, a hospital in the UK is required to secure patient data like medical histories to protect patients' privacy. Information about companies or organizations is generally not protected unless it directly contains personal data about individuals, such as employee information within a corporate structure. 2. Types of data covered. Data protection covers two types of data handling. Automated processing. This includes data processed by computers and other automatic systems. For instance, a bank managing customer account information digitally must follow data protection rules to prevent unauthorized access. Manual processing. The legislation also applies to manually created records, like paper files or ledgers, as long as these can be systematically organized to access individual information. For instance, if a healthcare provider uses a filing cabinet with organized medical records for each patient, they must secure this information to comply with data protection standards. 3. Definition of personal data. Personal data includes any details about a living individual that could reveal something about their identity, even if it's indirectly through identifiers like a customer or employee ID number. In the UK, for example, employment numbers in a company's payroll records would be considered personal data, as they are linked to specific employees and could be used to access their payroll, tax, and contact information. 4. Data controllers. A data controller is the entity, either an organization or an individual, that determines how and why personal data is processed. For instance, in a UK retail company, the HR department often acts as a data controller for employee records because it manages how employees' personal information is stored and used. The data controller has responsibilities to ensure this data is protected, used only for legitimate purposes, and accessible only to authorized personnel. 5. Real-world example. In 2020, a UK retail company, British Airways, was fined by the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, after a data breach exposed the personal details of over 400,000 customers due to inadequate data security measures. This case illustrates the importance of data protection and the accountability of data controllers to secure personal data and prevent unauthorized access as mandated by data protection legislation. Data controllers in the UK, as well as third-party data processors, often referred to as Computer Bureau, are required to register with the Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, which is the regulatory authority for data protection in the UK. By registering, data controllers declare their data processing activities, which adds transparency and accountability to how they handle personal data. Here's a closer look at key responsibilities and the rights this legislation affords to individuals, with real-world examples for clarity. 1. Limiting data usage to registered purposes. Data controllers must restrict their processing of personal data strictly to the purposes they have registered with the ICO. This means that if a company registers to use customer data for marketing purposes, it cannot then use that same data for unrelated activities, like selling it to third parties without explicit consent. For example, if a retail company in the UK registers customer information to manage sales and improve customer service, using that data later for advertising without informing customers would breach these requirements and could lead to fines or enforcement actions. 2. Data protection principles. Data controllers must comply with the data protection principles, which establish rules for managing personal data securely, fairly, and transparently. These principles guide the ethical handling of personal information, including keeping data accurate, up-to-date, and only as long as necessary for its registered purpose. Violating these principles may lead to penalties and compensation claims from affected individuals. For instance, the UK telecommunications company TalkTalk was fined in 2016 for failing to follow adequate data protection practices, which allowed a breach exposing customer data to unauthorized access. The case highlighted the importance of strict adherence to data security principles. 3. Rights of data subjects. The legislation grants individuals, referred to as data subjects, several rights to protect their personal information. Right to seek compensation. Data subjects may seek compensation if they suffer damage or distress due to unauthorized disclosure, data loss, or inaccuracies in their records. For example, if a bank customer's personal information were mistakenly disclosed to a third party, and this resulted in financial loss or distress, the customer could pursue compensation through the courts. The data breach at British Airways, which exposed customers' payment card details, led to significant claims and fines, showcasing the legal recourse individuals have for privacy violations. Right to rectify or remove inaccurate data. If incorrect data is held about an individual, they can request that it be corrected or deleted. This right empowers people to ensure their personal records accurately reflect their identity and circumstances. For example, if a UK employee's job title is incorrectly recorded in their HR file, which then impacts their benefits eligibility, they can request this error be corrected to prevent further issues. Right to access. Individuals have the right to request and view the personal data a company holds about them. For example, under the Data Protection Act, a university student can ask their institution to disclose any personal information held in their records. Known as a subject access request, this right allows individuals to know what data is stored, helping them ensure their data is correct and used fairly. Right to know the purpose and recipients of data processing. Individuals are entitled to understand why their data is collected, how it will be used, and who may access it. For instance, a patient visiting an NHS facility in the UK may inquire about how their health information will be stored, processed, and potentially shared with other healthcare providers. This transparency allows individuals to make informed decisions about consenting to share their personal data. These rights and obligations are essential to protecting individuals' privacy and ensuring organizations maintain trust and responsibility when handling personal data. Organizations that fail to comply with these rules risk serious consequences, including hefty fines and damage to their reputation. The data protection principles serve as the backbone of data protection legislation, ensuring that personal data is collected, stored, and used responsibly and securely. Here is a breakdown of each principle, along with detailed explanations and real-world examples to help clarify how each one plays a crucial role in protecting individual rights. 1. Fair and lawful processing of data. Explanation. Data must be collected and processed in a manner that is transparent, fair, and legal. Information should not be acquired through deception or misrepresentation. Example. If a company wants to gather customer information for a loyalty program, it must explain clearly what the information will be used for and gain consent, rather than secretly using it for targeted marketing. For instance, if an online retailer in the UK obtained customer details by falsely claiming it was for account verification, but actually used it for marketing purposes, this would breach fair and lawful processing requirements. 2. Data held for specific lawful purposes. Explanation. Data should only be collected for clearly defined legitimate purposes. Once collected, it must only be used in line with those purposes. Example. If a charity collects donor information for processing donations, it should not later use that information to send unrelated promotional material without explicit consent. For instance, if a UK charity collected email addresses for donation receipts but then used them to send marketing emails without informing donors, it would be violating this principle. 3. Data must be adequate, relevant, and not excessive. Explanation. Only the necessary amount of data should be collected, and it should be directly related to the purpose for which it is collected. Example. If a UK university requires student information for course registration, it would be excessive to ask for details about their family members unless relevant to the registration process. An example of excessive data collection would be if the university requested details unrelated to the academic process, like marital status, which might be irrelevant to the registration. 4. Accuracy and up-to-date data. Explanation. Data must be kept accurate and, where necessary, up to date. Inaccurate data can cause harm and must be rectified or deleted as necessary. Example, a bank holding customer address data should update records when notified of a change, avoiding the risk of sending sensitive mail to the wrong address. In the UK, there have been instances where out-of-date credit information has harmed credit scores, highlighting the importance of maintaining accurate data for all customers. 5. Data retention. Only as long as necessary. Explanation. Personal data should not be kept for longer than is necessary to fulfill the purpose for which it was collected. After this time, it should be securely deleted. Example. An employer may retain employee information for payroll purposes during employment, but should delete it within a specified period after the employee leaves the company. For example, if a UK employer retained employee records indefinitely after departure, this would breach this principle, as data should be deleted after a set retention period. 6. Rights of data subjects. Explanation. Individuals have rights concerning their personal data. They can inquire if their data is held, access it, understand its purpose, and request corrections or deletion where appropriate. Example. If a customer requests information on what personal data a retail store holds, the company must provide access to the records, explain the purpose of data use, and correct any errors. In the UK, under GDPR, an individual might request their data be corrected if it's inaccurate, such as correcting an incorrect billing address held by a utility company. 7. Security of data. Explanation. Adequate security measures must be in place to prevent unauthorized access, alterations, or accidental loss of data. This principle emphasizes the responsibility of the data controller to enforce strong data security protocols. Example. A hospital storing patient information must use secure servers and limit access only to authorized medical personnel. If security is weak, hackers could steal sensitive patient information. An example of this in the UK is the 2017 NHS data breach, where a lack of robust cybersecurity protocols led to significant data exposure, underscoring the need for strong data protection policies. 8. Restriction on exporting data outside the European Economic Area, EEA. Explanation. Data can only be transferred outside the EEA if the destination country ensures an adequate level of data protection. This principle protects personal data from being moved to regions with weaker data laws. Example. A UK-based company cannot transfer customer information to a server in a country without adequate data protection standards. For instance, if a UK retailer decided to store customer data on a server in a country with weak data protection laws, this transfer would be illegal unless special measures were taken to ensure data safety. Each of these principles plays a vital role in data protection by setting strict boundaries on how personal information should be handled. These rules prevent misuse, help build trust, and protect individuals' privacy by ensuring data controllers and processors are held accountable for their data handling practices. Thank you all for joining us for Lesson 9. I hope you found it helpful and feel more confident in what we've covered. We'll be diving into Chapter 2 next, and I'm excited to explore the new concepts with you. See you there, and remember to keep up the